Mauricio.
Again, thank you for having me. Um, again, my name is Tia Edison, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was killed by the police department. As of today, we have had like 3 officers fired. 2 of them have already received new jobs and in other districts. And I was trying to look real quick. There was an article, and last time I talked about Daniel Cameron, who I personally got arrested on his front lawn because I was protesting and refused to leave. And now he is charging the state $600,000 for security, even though it's but there was also in the news again because last week there was robot calls from his office that called for all of these malicious folks to come to the Capitol and protest and try to add, they want to protest and impeach our Democratic governor. And so he had that call when Trump had the call last week. Daniel Cameron had that same call here in this state. So that's concerning that they really are working nationally on a level to get the white supremacists out to the streets. And I had shared a video with David. This was September 9th. And all of those folks that you've seen at the Capitol, they came to Breonna Park, which is what we call that was our protest home. That was in the business district of Louisville. And they came there. Well, they actually said they was coming to protest the Derby or the people that were going to protest the Derby. But what they didn't say was that early, like 6 o'clock in the morning, they rallied up, and about 9 or 10, they end up marching to the square. And like I told somebody, I've went through a lot of trauma all my life. I'm 45 years old. I have never been that scared in my life. And so when you look at all of the video clips of even the police officers and the folks that were at the Capitol, imagine that happening to us, and we only had 20 people. The police were nowhere around. Like they've always been around us and always coming out with riot gear, but that day, and the news had showed them walking. They walked for about almost a mile to us. The news showed it from the camera, from the sky, and they never did show up until the people were ready to leave. So I wanted to come on here and make that connection of how the nation is really moving. Like what you see is what happened at the Capitol, and then you heard rumors about them going to all 50 states. They have been showing up here in Kentucky for the last year. About a year, not even a year ago, it was the beginning of 2020. They hung an effigy. So I was just really wanting to let you guys see the connection on the local levels. I do have a couple resolutions that I added to, David has helped me, and I added it to the draft of today's meeting. And so what that looks like, hold on, I'm gonna try to bring it up while I'm on here, is so we are asking for help. At this point, we've had two activists been killed, and so they're not available. Of course, the government is police to police. So that is our next step locally. Just in my organization, we want to come together and implement a cop watch. So we definitely need security. At the same time that George Floyd was killed. So she ended up quitting there because the police officers killed the man, and then she gets hired here. And so that's who we have now. So our demand is to ask her to arrest the remaining officers that so yesterday, 2 days ago, the lawyer on Breonna Taylor's case came out and said that there is 18 additional body camera footage. So if you're not familiar, from day one, they told us there was no body camera footage. And then about 3 months ago, like right before when Daniel Cameron got the evidence, they admitted that there was some body camera footage. They did not give us all of it. And then 2 days ago, they have came out with 18 more body camera footages. So we are demanding that the whole system has to go, because they have completely lied from March 13th, almost a year ago, about just the evidence that they have. And so we are demanding that all of the officers, the ones that y'all have not even heard, and I will put all of those names in a document for you. And we are asking that you call our chief of police, our new chief of police, and demand that they be arrested, not just fired, but arrested and convicted. Because if we don't get any convictions, it's pointless. They still can get hired in other places. So the funding for the cop watch, the demand of all of the officers to be killed, because we are in a state of emergency. This is genocide over here. Black folks are dying. Our city, we've already had 11 shootings and killings. Like my daughter last week had to go to a funeral of her roommate that was killed. That's how traumatic. I need to leave because my kids are from 16 to 26, and that's the prime hunting season here in Louisville. So, the fear, I'm actually getting certified to be a racial trauma therapist right now. So I'm going to be going to all of the community protesters that I know, and I'm going to try to start giving them some type of therapy. I haven't looked in the chat, so I don't know if there's any type of questions that folks want to know. Yeah, that's the David has put in the chat the Kentucky Alliance. I know that they're going to be revamping and putting more stuff on there today, but you can look into on that website, and that's where you can donate. You can even put like for Cop Watch if you like to. And then, like I said, I will give you all the information to call our legislators. Breonna's Law is one of the, it's to ban no-knock warrants statewide, and I can give you that as well because we're in legislation. But we have 75 to 80% of our legislators are Republicans, and so we already know how that is. They're only going to pull the bills that they want to, but so we are demanding that they pull the Breonna Taylor's bill because it's already written up by a legislator, and that they pass that, and that we really want that passed on a national level as well. So I will get all of that to you in just a minute. I don't know, David, is there anything else that you think I should add? I know he's been working directly with me.
Comrades have any questions? I think it's obviously the comrades are playing a heroic role and they're in danger, and we have to be alert. So we have to give them all possible support. Of course, from afar, we feel a little helpless, but all kinds of political and moral support and any other kind of practical support that you can that we can offer, please don't hesitate to tell us. It's open to any comrades who want to speak now. One thing I meant to say, if I could just say first, I want to just give you a list of we had comrades last time from Brazil, South Africa, Britain, France, USA, Pakistan, Denmark, Cyprus, Iran, Bangladesh, Belarus, Sri Lanka, Germany, Ireland, and more remotely, Zimbabwe. Today, we also have, we're particularly welcome, comrades from Sweden, from India, from the Netherlands, and I want to pay special tribute to two comrades from the Philippines who are with us today. The reason I mention them is that for them, it's already past midnight, and they have been preparing and looking forward to joining us today. So welcome to all of those comrades. Who wants to come in first to the discussion? Ed. By the way, if you want to speak, you can put your hand up manually, but it would be better if you could use the participants box, just tick on raise hand. Okay.
Well, Roger, this is a question to Tia in response to what she's just said. And it may be I'm asking the question because some of the sound was difficult to hear, and I didn't hear everything you said. But thank you for your important and very worrying and also highly inspiring report, Tia, and all solidarity from this meeting to you and your comrades who are out on the front line there. Can you tell us, and you may have said it, but how has the community around in Louisville responded to this latest development? Are there more people going out on the streets to protest about it, or are people feeling cowed and intimidated and staying at home? I'm interested to know, you know, what the fight back is, or what it has the potential of being. That's it, Roger. It was just a question.
Well, thank you, Tia.
Yeah, we are definitely, I think what Tamika Palmer, who was Breonna Taylor's mother, she actually like 3 o'clock this morning said, all hands on deck. They're trying to get rid of the park before the white supremacists come. They're trying to clean up our park and get us out. And so it went viral. Everybody shared it. And then the chief of police must have came to her and said, no, we're not doing that. We're just going to clean it up. And so when Tamika Palmer says for us to do something and she's not ready to end this fight, she's like our fearless leader, the mom is. And so no one is backing down, even though we have been killed. We have been overcharged because we've all been arrested. I was charged with a felony. Everybody has been overcharged. But we're not stopping. If Tamika tells us we need to be out there Monday night all the way up until Wednesday, there will probably be at least 200 to 500 people out there from Monday night till Tuesday night. So yeah, we're not backing down.
Thank you, Tia. David, did you want to come in now with the?
If I could explain to the comrades, the last time we were meant to hear from 3 Zimbabwean comrades who had sent videos. Very unfortunately, we didn't. And I had promised them after they had made the point repeatedly, they would like to be heard. If we could now play the videos. Unfortunately, now I had them all in sequence, but anyway, let's just hear the first comrade.
Africa is one of the large continents on Earth, and it is around 54 nations. This continent is regarded as rich in minerals and other natural resources. It is a great continent with a vast difference of cultures, languages, ethics, and tribes, accompanied with a great history that is mostly misinterpreted. There's a lot to say about Africa only as a continent. But on this, we are mainly focused on the people who proudly call this continent home, and that is Africans. And I, Amos Pisky, am being one of these great people, such great people. Africans are indeed great people, and they are hardworking on their own. This can be proved by looking back in the history of mankind during the time of slave trade, where Africans were taken as slaves into other continents. Now, what makes Africa seem so backward as compared to other continents is somewhat of a simple answer, but mainly getting truth. That is the crisis of leadership in Africa. It has remained one of the greatest challenges faced by Africans, and this crisis hit hard on every ordinary citizen, bearing a negative impact on their daily living. The doctrine of capitalism is highly mastered by these African states. It is like almost all African governments are capitalist-led. We have a situation where governments operate as large companies, but only to the benefit of the one that is in power. This being the reason why after 30 years or so of independence, we still have...
Comrades, I'm sorry, that was the whole presentation there. Let me bring the next comrade on.
My name is Leo Mashachiwandiri. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm a member of SWIFT Studies which initiate Fast Transition. I would like to express my solidarity greetings to everyone all over the globe. SWIFT is the new voice for workers in Zimbabwe because trade unions are inactive due to retrenchment in the non-performing economy of Zimbabwe. I believe capitalism has failed to solve problems of the world despite all the technological advancement of the world. SADC was formed to create a regional marketing trade space for Southern African countries. This was also directed to lower the dominance of South Africa in terms of industrialization, and investments. But still up to date, South Africa is the most industrialized country, not only in Southern Africa, but in the whole of Africa. Zimbabwe was once the breadbasket of Africa through farming. Despite taking over our farms by the Zimbabwean government from the colonialists or imperialists, still workers are still at standstill. No jobs, not a decent wage. Capitalism and repressive laws from former colonizers are still in existence. Political discussions are banned in Zimbabwe. Trade unions are harassed, although they were fighting capitalism imposed by the imperialists, but now they are keeping capitalism principles. But that is what they fought against during liberation struggle. Large corporations from Europe, Russia, China are busy exploiting resources of most African states to the benefit of themselves.
Okay, thanks, Comrade Leah. And then finally, this comrade, I think it's Comrade Amos.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. My name is Nyasha Zapas, a member of Street International Group here in Zimbabwe. It's such a great honor and privilege to be participating at such a wonderful world-class virtual conference for Workers International Network, and for me to share my views and thoughts when it comes to issues of global revolution and its correlation to the affairs of the working class, especially in the African continent. As the world revolution has begun, the advancement in the new technology and the social media are the greatest influence of mass spreading of the revolutionary mode. For example, last year in 2020, the whole world was made aware of the organized revolts among the African American population around the issues of Black Lives Matter in the United States of America. The unprecedented awareness of events is not the same in Southern Africa, especially in Zimbabwe. The atmosphere is totally different. The new technology advancements are still under the control of the capitalists, and this was seen during January 2019 riot and demonstration by the mass population over the issues of unemployment rates, living and working conditions, where the government ordered a completely shutdown of the internet for about 2 weeks. Still on technology, the new technology advancements are not benefiting the masses of Africa at all. While countries with much mineral resources such as DRC, Uganda, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe are still suffering. The index of the unemployment rate is still on the rise. Many workers are experiencing job loss and wage cuts. The trade and workers' unions are completely paralyzed due to the regulations that are imposed by the regime governments, who are the forefront runners of the capitalism system. The capitalism system is mainly derived and protected by the former revolutionary parties in the Southern Africa. These parties' purpose was to get rid of the capitalism by the former colonial rule when they were formed. But that was not the case when they get into power. They became the capitalists themselves and political powerhouses with support from the Chinese. Speaking about the Chinese, the relationship between the Southern African states and the Chinese government is a core of concern. I think it is a great threat to socialism in Southern Africa. That it has managed to support the capitalism and political goals of the ruling former revolutionary parties and coordinate of massive infrastructure development projects in the Southern Africa. But no one really knows what are the basis of this friendship. And no one really knows what the Chinese is after and what are the benefits of the Chinese in investing all of these funds that it is investing into the Southern Africa. Maybe connecting and controlling of the African economy by the Chinese will drive them to become a world imperialist and increase its capacity to dominate and overtake the United States of America. Yes, the global revolution might have started, but the African continent is still lagging behind. Despite China being one of the world's powerhouses and its economy being second to that of the United States of America, Its influence over African economies has propped up repression and has not yet helped in providing and improving living standards in less economically developed countries that it is investing into. Its agenda is concussion from African government on huge losses to the workers and the youth that are in the African continent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, comrades. If I could explain, these are our young comrades who have now come into an organization we've set up in Zimbabwe. It's called SWIFT, S-W-I-F-T, which is a youth organization which is now organizing debates and putting forward the idea of democratic socialism in the schools and in the factories and the workplaces in Zimbabwe. And we are working together with the youth there and the street vendors, who are a large-scale women's organization in Zimbabwe, which is defending women traders on the streets against the police and even the army in terms of the repression of the urban poor in Zimbabwe. So we thank those comrades. I'm sorry it wasn't perfect, but at least our comrades have now been heard. Over to you, Roger.
Right, thank you. And it's great that the comrades have managed to overcome the technical difficulties to be able to speak with us. Do we have anybody else? I don't see anybody with any hands up. I've just been counting the nationalities here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 nationalities at my count who are represented here today. Please come in. We take up the discussion from last time, or if you want to take up anything from the document which was circulated yesterday, as well as the previous document, or if you have any reports or any comments to make, please, this is your time. Right. Sorry, Leslie.
International solidarity, comrades from Liverpool. I'm really pleased that the document talks about the struggle of women and the fight against patriarchy and linking that to international socialist revolution. In the health service in the UK, women are 80% of health and care workers. There's a new generation of nurses in struggle against the official unions. One of the nurse organisers spoke at a demonstration she organised, and it was the first demonstration she'd ever been on. The main nurses' union are taking legal action against the rank and file campaigning. It's not a union, it's a campaigning body of nurses. That's how bad some of the official trade unions are, and the attitude to young women fighters and young fighters. Those health workers are also exhausted. We've also had the rise of reaction. Yesterday, some COVID deniers, women, invaded our local hospital and abused staff and patients with COVID denials, swore at them, etc. But we're heading in the UK for 100,000 COVID deaths directly related to COVID. And that's why we need to get rid of this system. And I would pay tribute to the wonderful women's struggles that we've heard of at the various WIN meetings, and so glad that we're linking them up with this international network, and hope that we can build further links, for instance, in places like Poland, where the women's struggle spread out to massive, massive demonstrations and massive support against their right-wing government. So solidarity, comrades, and so privileged to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I think Comrade Saranapala from Sri Lanka wanted to speak.
Welcome to all comrades. I like to draw your attention the main perspective documents because roughly I went through it. I would understand that I couldn't find how superpowers in the coming period, the USA and their people and China and their people are the two camps, how it will develop in the coming period. So, but because I couldn't see the main perspective document. So, however, I think it's important to if can know what is the position of the wing, the comrades who written the perspectives. And another thing is that yeah, that's so that the pandemic is precipitating the world revolution. It's okay, but the problem is they are the world party. How was the world party? Is it ready to carry on the revolution or organize the revolution? So it should you know we need to discuss about it. And also then on that basis, I start the discussion, and also I like to give some points in Sri Lanka because all the comrades, I don't know that all the comrades knew that this present government came to power a year ago, and now they started their plan, but they failed. So, however, they expected the World Bank and IMF, you know, the funds for the development, and also Chinese banks. They had some hopes from Chinese bank loans, but now we can see that I think two of superpowers did not continue as they promised the present government. And the thing is that the government is normally they came to power back of racist forces in the country, especially the monks of the temples, and they were the organizers from their campaign. So now, however, now we can see that the government is going to sell every resources in the main resources in the country, and now we can see they are going to sell the part of harbor, the main harbor in Colombo. Now they are talking with India. The Adani is the company. Now they are going to get a part of harbor, and now they formed all the trade unions in the harbor formed a unity to protect the harbor, and they protest against to sell the India. But you know, last week the government discussed with the trade unions, but no solutions, because government says now they have no option without selling that part. It is the main income part from the harbor to Sri Lanka. So therefore now coming period, we can see some struggle, you know, against that. And also we had a Zoom meeting a week ago, including our organizations also. And so it was, there were 300 participants in the country. But you know that as normally Sri Lanka, as Asian countries, they have no enough facility to participate all the comrades. But however, some trade union leaders and some engineers and some professors also participating the discussion. So it was a very good discussion. And the thing is now, as the same time, I want to explain the left in the country, you know, left movement in the country. It's very weak actually. Actually, it's a main opposition also very weak. You know that The traditional party UNP lost the last general election. They couldn't win only one seat they got. You know that 45 years they ruled the country. It's a big and main opposition in Sri Lanka, UNP, but they lost their party. And the break, you know that the leading body, Sajid Premadasa, was the son of former President Premadasa, and they call it the Unity Force, the name of their organization. So they got 54 seats, and UNP won, and nowhere they left any organization. And but somehow JVP, I want to explain that is the Petty bourgeoisie left JVP. So they got only 3 seats, I think. And this is the situation in the left. And our organization is a very small organization, but however, we contested the presidential election also. I mean, we put a candidate, the women combat, that Ajanta Pereira was the environmentalist. But however, she was not fully convinced the Marxism. So therefore, we got some trouble. And so, however, now she's not active in the organization. Second round, the parliamentary election also we contested at SPSL, and we couldn't get any seats. But we got some votes from all over the country. It signs to we can develop as an organization, the left organization. And now we started a discussion with the leftoids. It was the organization from a split from the NSSP. I have the NSSP, you know that it is a USEC, the FI, the affiliated FI. And however, they split it from the NSSP, and we are talking with them to unitely work together. And this is the situation. I want to keep to information all the comrades, and I'm going to stop at thank you. And if you want any questions, and so then we can discuss. Okay.
Thank you, comrade. It's John. Yes.
No, go on. It's following on from what Leslie said about the nurses of the Royal College of Nurses and their opposition to the rank and file. I think in the last week, we've seen the removal, this is to do with Britain, the removal of the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, who used to be, I don't know if he still is, a strong ally of Jeremy Corbyn. And I think what is coming over, and it's, if you like, following on Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, that it's under new leadership, and there is an implacable, I would say, hatred of the left. And I think we have to be aware going forward that that is going to be, if you like, a badge of honour that we're going to have to wear, that the Parliamentary Labour Party did all in its power when Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party to get rid of him, and when he came under attack, to basically stand aside and in many cases go along with the detractors of Corbyn. And I think that is one thing that we have to be completely aware of here in Britain. And I think it will be the same story internationally. The other thing I would like to raise is the issue of transitional demands. At the moment, Britain is going through an absolute crisis in terms of COVID-19. If we're not the top country in the world in pro rata deaths, we're very near it. For a population of 60 million or so, we have 100,000 deaths. America has 5 times our population, and they have somewhere in the region or moving on to 400,000 deaths. And what we've seen throughout the COVID crisis is an absolute scandal of corruption in terms of contracts being given, of corruption in terms of, if you like, products received that in many cases are not fit for purpose. And Johnson acting like a buffoon in Parliament, and I think a lot of it is a show, is just playing on that. And I think one thing's come out in the last few weeks is the total inadequate position of the government here in Britain in terms of people with COVID and calling for them to isolate. It's left to them to isolate, whether they're in a 1-bedroom flat with a family or whether they're in a mansion. In other countries, hotels are being utilised because they're largely redundant at the moment, and people are designated to stop in hotels. And also the other thing that's come out is the fact that because there isn't adequate remuneration to people who are told to isolate, many of them are ignoring that and thereby exacerbating, if you like, the COVID crisis. So I think the sort of demands that I think we should be raising, it may well be in the document because I've not seen it, is that we should be demanding work or full pay, and also a programme of useful public works. And part of that programme must be a proper health and care system where there are literally hundreds of thousands of vacancies in the nursing and care professions. And also there are 0 hours contracts, there is, if you like, minimum wage and overwork. And I think in a programme of public works, I think it should not just be, if you like, construction and infrastructure like a house building programme, but also a programme of people, you know, in the service sector, particularly in health and care. I'll leave it at that for now.
Felicity is next.
To start on a historical note, today is the anniversary of the birth of Eleanor Marx, and it's celebrated in the trade union movement in this country because she helped found the GMB, General Municipal Workers Union. But the reason it's particularly important to us when we're struggling to build an international is that she was the daughter of Karl Marx, but very much, you know, a campaigner in her own right. She was instrumental in setting up the first meetings of the Second International. The first meeting she had to organize in Paris, but she had to organize them in 2 different rooms because different factions wouldn't sit in the same room as each other. So the left hasn't changed very much in that respect. But finally, they did establish the very powerful Second International. And yes, it deteriorated, leaving basically only Rosa Luxemburg keeping the internationalist position. But it's worth recalling, you know, the history and saying that our struggles to found an international, you know, do reflect what's happened in the past, and that she's worthy of our commemoration today. I think that what we've got in this meeting with all the accounts of what's happening in different parts of the world is really powerful, and it must be like the early parts of the work to form the Second International, but the difficulties are, if anything, greater now than then, despite this wonderful magic means of communication across the world. I'd like to pick up on the points that the comrades from Sri Lanka made about the mass privatization and, you know, selling off of state assets. And that really goes to this whole idea that the capitalist system is not producing profits and and progress in the way that they would like to. So they have resorted to primitive accumulation. And it's either privatization or literally expropriation. And the privatization has caused huge problems in Britain. It's one of the reasons why this country is simply not responding properly, not responding as an advanced country to the COVID crisis, and that we have our public services have been so denuded of investment, of staff, and of planning that we're now facing, as the comrade said last about the dreadful deaths that we're facing. And I've just been on a Zoom with health workers and talking about the absolute catastrophe of exhaustion that they're facing, and having situations where, fifth wealthiest country in the world, they haven't got enough oxygen for the patients that they're treating. So, when we see people governments putting forward these ideas of privatization, we really do have to oppose them and say that they break the structure of society. They break what's been built in the post-war and sometimes pre-war world by damaging public sector provision. And public sector provisions, they're not for profit, but in order to provide a service. And that means it has to have some kind of surplus there for a crisis. We have no surplus, and therefore we are not on coping with a crisis. And a final point in everything that we say and do at the moment, we've got to be aware of the impact of this on the children. We've had a terrible, sickening situation in the UK where people who are entitled, where children who are entitled to a meal at school, because the schools are closed, they've been sent literally scraps of vegetables to make a meal, including things like half a tomato and half a carrot, half an onion in a disgusting package. The company's been paid £30 to send the children food for a week, and what they sent is worth about £5. So the ruling class, the rich have literally robbed our children of £25 a week. But apart from that, the level of poverty that children are facing in this country and across the world is something that we should not be quiet about. We should be raising Cain about the issue of feeding the next generation and feeding them well. And there are resources in this world aplenty to feed every child well. Thank you.
Can we have Silvana next from Brazil?
Good afternoon, comrades. I'm going to just try to speak about the struggles of the Brazilian woman at work, but to talk about how we are respected or not in a working place, we need to look at the history of a woman. Simone de Beauvoir, she already told us that a woman is seen as a second sex. So they're saying that women were just look as extension of the man. So when we start working, we didn't have the right to be at work because they think that women should be just at home taking care of children. So the society creates some social control to maintain the power over women and minorities. Angela Davis once told us that in order to look at the woman's situation, we need to also look at the race and social class. Even though we women around the world have been able to vote for their governors or politicians. Brazilian women just were able to vote in 1932, so it's pretty late, actually. When we go out to work, we need to work as any other worker, but at the same time, we need to come back home and we need to do the chores that are left. We in Brazil, most of the women, they work twice. They work outside the home and inside. And once, even if they have if they are a doctor, or even if they are if they have college degrees, they need to prove themselves over and over. For instance, if they work in a field that is dangerous, they need to worry about their well-being. They could be raped, or they could be disrespected in a field. I think in 2003, we have the PT, is a workers' party in Brazil. Is they have this social democracy ideology, so they try to help poor women to stay at work and at the same time have some extra money. If they couldn't go work, at the same, they could take care of their children and have the minimum to stay at home. Things like electricity, food, or essentials that, like in a first world, we don't need to worry about anymore. But in Brazil, it's still the basic. We're still fighting for the essentials. And a matter of fact, he creates the Bolsa Familia is like a consul money tax. I don't know. They give it to the woman, but they need to, at the same time, they need to take the children to school, and they need to take them to take the vaccination. And if they don't do that, they would lose the right to have this money every month. But it's not enough for them, so they need to continue to work in order to provide to the family. Most of the families in Brazil are supported by women, but with the Bolsonaro election, women have been suffering immensely, because they are killing women just because we are women. Also, they are raping more women than before he was elected, because he doesn't have respect for Black or for the minority, actually, for the LGBT or for the woman or for the indigenous. With the pandemic, we also are fighting, because women that goes out to work, they sometimes work in other people's home as a domestic workers, and they haven't been able to do so, because with the pandemic, the elite, they don't want them in the house, because they think that they're going to catch the virus. But guess what? Who brought the disease to Brazil were the rich people, because they are the one that go traveling, and they brought the coronavirus to us. Yes, the last speaker spoke about how the Brazilian people are dying just because Bolsonaro is not giving the right attention to the pandemic, so he's not providing oxygen for the hospital in Amazonas. And people, I think it even goes, it's going to affect the environment, because once if the person dies, they are not burying them deep enough, because the environmental people, I think, researcher, I think they are thinking like, if you don't bury the person deep enough, the virus is going to continue to be on the dirt. So, I mean, Bolsonaro is a danger not only for the woman or for the minority in Brazil, but for the world. So, thank you.
Thank you, Silvana. There are now, I've got Vivian from Britain, Finn from Ireland, Jan from Sweden, John from USA, Hafez speaking from Bangladesh. So, Vivian, you're next.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It follows on what I want to say from what John and Leslie were saying about the health service in Britain. A slightly more amusing take on what's been going on is to look at the Socialist Health Association, which had a serious role to play in inventing the National Health Service in the first place, but currently is seen by the Labour hierarchy as being one of the socialist societies that has delegates to constituencies, and they need to take over because they can't let these left-wingers who campaign on things be in charge. And so they've been really doing the most extraordinary things to take over these associations. Can you imagine a small association of, well, we had about 130 at our AGM, which was large because they were packing the meeting. But imagine 3 MPs coming to a meeting like that because they were worried about their position. Normally they wouldn't bother. And one of those MPs nominated himself to be a delegate to his constituency, even though he has the right to go anyway, to prevent somebody from the left having that position. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't also serious. And they spent the whole year trying to do one thing and another, which I can't be bothered to go into because it's so stupid. Ways of removing our control over that organization by declaring delegates to be not constitutionally elected and such like. Anyway, we'll see. London, for example, had a meeting, Roger tells me, of about 900 people. Well, in December, the entire national membership was at about 1,000. So somebody's been packing a meeting, don't you think? It would be sad if it wasn't serious, or it would be serious if it wasn't funny. I'm not going to go on any more about it. I just thought I'd make that point. I can say more another time.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. Finn.
Comrades, I want to begin by commending the courage of Tia and her comrades in Louisville in standing up to the white supremacist thugs, and they need to prepare for what's to come next week. In many cities across the US, people have to develop methods of self-defense and organizations of self-defense. And it's easy to say that here, but it's a real danger to the lives of activists now in America. And it'll be very pronounced in the couple of days running up to Biden's inauguration. So again, I want to commend Tia for her courage and commitment to her community and her bravery. I want to make, and to warn comrades of what's coming, but I want to make some points about COVID. The document explains very well, the supplement, that the COVID epidemic is a capitalist construct. It arises from the destruction of habitats, the destruction of nature, the destruction of places in which certain creatures live, for example, bats, their habitats destroyed so they come into new areas closer to human society. The climate change and the destruction of habitats are linked. And the development of viruses is not a new discovery. It's known for many, many years that this is a consequence of mass production under capitalism. They're what are known as hog hotels now, where these buildings have many, many floors, and the only occupants are pigs for the purpose of mass producing meat products. There are lakes and ponds in China with tens of thousands of ducks living on the lake. The destruction of the habitat of wildfowl who lived on these marshlands, they've now been developed into other sites for production and building and so on, means that the wildfowl integrate with domestic fowl, itself then being a part of the development of viruses. It's the nature of viruses to change and to develop and to supersede other viruses. And the closer and the more intense the production facilities are, the worse that process is going to be. But I want to make a point about this vaccine and the issue of the public good. We don't normally talk about the public good, but let's have a look at it. The public good requires that vaccine is widely available, is widely developed, and it's also necessary for all the firms that work in this area should all work together in a cooperative endeavor. But that doesn't happen under capitalism. Each firm has its own agenda to get a vaccine that's going to make more money than the neighbor firm down the road. That's against the public good. All firms involved should be integrated in this endeavor. Also, we're told that Pfizer and BioNTech have developed a vaccine. They haven't. The scientists working in the laboratories of Pfizer and working in the laboratories of BioNTech and AstraZeneca, with the assistance of universities like Oxford, they developed the vaccine. It was the know-how and the expertise of scientists, lab technicians, epidemiologists, and others with a knowledge of viral development who developed the vaccine. But yes, that vaccine belongs to Pfizer, and not just to the name Pfizer, but to shareholders and investors in Pfizer who have no involvement whatsoever in the development of the vaccine. And the board of directors who make decisions are not involved at all in the development of the vaccine. So the public good requires that all firms are integrated and that the public controls these firms and controls the decisions that are being made by these companies in relation to the development of the vaccine. Now, all that concerns a private company is profit. They have no interest whatsoever in the public good. They'll develop any product that they think will sell. Many years ago, I was looking for a job in a company in West London, which some people might recognize as Wall Sausages and Pies. I'm a scientist and I was looking for a job as a researcher in that company. So the project that I was assigned to was this. They were developing products known as polyphosphates that they would dissolve in water. The ham would then be placed into the solution of the polyphosphates for a period of time. And when the ham is taken out of this solution, it's heavier, more money. So a ham which weighed a certain amount got a certain amount of money. If you increase the weight by the absorption of polyphosphates, it gets more money. So the project was there to swindle the public into thinking that the ham they were buying, that the weight was entirely ham. It wasn't. Some of it was a liquid and a solution absorbed into the texture of the ham. That's what capitalism does. Their interest is in developing profit. Now, going back to this issue of public control, there must also be public control of distribution of the vaccine. No private company, Circle or anybody else, should have any involvement whatsoever in tracking and tracing, in distributing or anything else. All of that function should be taken into public ownership. Now, you can call it transitional demands or socialist demands, but it's absolutely essential that all aspects of vaccine production and distribution and circulation and testing and tracing is all publicly owned and publicly controlled, and the companies are brought into public ownership in that regard. Now, nationalization is a more difficult concept to put across. For example, Pfizer, there are many companies in Ireland, or sorry, Pfizer has many production facilities in Ireland, so do all the chemical companies, and all the major companies have branches here. And obviously in America, in Britain, in Germany. So nationalisation doesn't mean that the Irish government takes over the Pfizer company. What we're talking about here is international cooperation, such as to achieve public control of production facilities in the production of the vaccines, and that all firms share all of their knowledge and all their expertise and all their research and all their discovery with each other under public control, so that the best resolution is found and not each company trying to get an advantage over the other. The nurses in Ireland recently called for the nationalisation of private hospitals. And the reason for that, and it's one of the more progressive unions, the Nurses Union in Ireland, is that we have a divided health system here, where you have public hospitals and then the same grounds, a private hospital. So those who pay sufficiently get treated in the private hospital in the same grounds, just across the roads, in some cases, just in walking distance. And those who rely on the public system go to public hospitals. Public hospitals are jammed, absolutely jammed, with patients now suffering from COVID, and the ICU facilities are overstretched. And the government has agreed to purchase facilities in the private hospitals, which is a scandal that you would pay the private hospitals to use their facilities. And that's where the public good comes in. It's in the public good that these facilities are taken into public ownership for the purpose of providing treatment for people who suffer from COVID and to alleviate the distress due to the overcrowding in the public hospitals. So these issues of public control are absolutely crucial at this point in terms of production and everything else. And as I say, in the case of Ireland, taken into public ownership or public control, at least the private facilities. Last week in the discussion, I alluded to two issues, and I'd like to hear some discussion about them. One was the complete failure of the mass parties across the globe, in Europe, South America, in Asia, to solve the problems of humanity. And the other issue was the fragmentation of the left, which makes it more difficult to replace these mass parties. I'd like to have some discussion about that, because when we call for issues like I mentioned earlier on about public control of these facilities in fighting COVID, we also need to look at who's going to do it. What parties, what organizations are going to take up this demand. So we can make the demand, but we need to direct the demand at certain organizations in the expectation that they will take it up and make it into a public campaign. So what becomes a demand in relation to the defeat of COVID becomes a mass campaign when it's taken up by mass parties. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you, Finn. Well, next, Comrade Jan from Sweden, and John Ryman after that. Be ready, yeah? And then Ed Bober.
Well, many speakers before me have talked about the coronavirus. Maybe we should have a special timetable for the coronavirus and other things. I would like to give some sort of report from Sweden. We have the coronavirus also in Sweden, and the Swedish political system have been very unable to cope with it. Although in Sweden we have the resources, but the strategy really was to achieve something called flock immunity. So there wasn't an initially lockdown to organize what was needed to test people, to track the way the coronavirus spreads through society, and then to isolate people. In Sweden, we didn't test and track and isolate, and we didn't have a lockdown in the beginning. the theory, it's a lot of hush hush, but I believe Britain and Sweden in the beginning just went for the most easy solution. Let the people get the coronavirus. It will kill some, but then the community, the population will be immune against it, and then it's over. Britain reacted before Sweden and change its pattern. From a Swedish point of view, Boris Johnson wasn't all that bad because he realized they were on the wrong track. Of course, the privatization of British hospitals has taken a big toll. If you look at the figures, if you count the number of deaths in Britain, it's 1,300 for each million of inhabitants in Britain. In Sweden, we have 1,000 for each million of inhabitants. And just before Christmas, we did some counting. If Norway, Denmark, and Finland was one country, and we compared it with Sweden, then the combined country of Norway, Denmark, and Finland would have between 20 and 25% of the deaths in Sweden. The day before yesterday, so many people died of COVID in Sweden during 24 hours, during one day, that it was half of the total number of Norway. So it's not good. But this is not because of lack of resources really in Sweden. Although it was because of the initial catastrophic strategy to let the people get the coronavirus and reach something about the level of 70%. When 70% of the population are immune by vaccine, but that wasn't available, or by having the disease and getting well, then the disease will just disappear. Yeah, but it wasn't the case. It was very, very, well, it had disastrous effects. And I believe it was The Guardian who exposed that the same strategy initially was in Britain. Sweden and Britain was different from the rest of the countries in EU. So when it comes to the coronavirus, with the right strategy, Sweden could have been very successful, but it wasn't. And now the population are paying a very heavy price. We, as the Workers' Party group, have been very involved in the discussion. I have written together with Davis between 45 and 50 columns in the local paper. It's the biggest newspaper, daily newspaper in the north of Sweden. And I have been given the opportunity to have a standing blog. The party leaders in the municipal community have one. Everyone can have it. And well, most people know about our criticism against this strategy. So it's very dangerous to discuss this question when you couldn't go out on a limb to discuss the more scientific aspects of the coronavirus, because you have to be really an expert. But luckily, we have a lot of experts. We have a big hospital in the north of Sweden. And luckily for us, there was an opposition against the national strategists and also what's it called? WHO, the United Nations organ for health care. I hope you know what I mean, WHO.
Yep.
They promoted this strategy: test, track, and isolate. And that's what we have proposed, together with, of course, more resources to the hospitals. And also when it comes to the homes for the elderly, most people in Sweden have died in those homes. And a lot of people doesn't have job security in those homes. They go to their job if they are sick or if they are healthy. They cannot afford to stay home. So even if they feel that they have a cold, it might be corona, it might not. They will go when they are called by telephone because they cannot afford to stay home. And the wrong strategy, together with too little job security, I believe those two are the main factors behind the disastrous results of what's happening in Sweden. So I want you to remember that if Finland, Denmark, and Norway were one country, they would have something like just a fifth of the number of deaths in Sweden.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. John, do you want to speak? If not, I'll call Ed. You ready? Ed Boba.
That means John's not speaking at the moment, is that right?
John? I think he's not speaking at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you, Roger. I wanted to come back to this question I think that Sarana Pala touched on about trade between, or the trade war between China and the United States. There is a trade war going on, and there are some in the capitalist world who hope that with a change of presidency in the United States, it may be possible to ease up that trade war. But trade wars tend to have a life of their own, and it probably won't be so easy once this rivalry has been set in motion. And there are kind of underlying attitudes on the part of US politicians, irrespective of whether they're Republican or Democrat, that because the Chinese economy is so heavily supported by the state sector, that somehow the Chinese are cheating in international trade and kind of subsidizing trade, and therefore China has progressively been getting an advantage on world markets, and that's not fair. And the language of conflict between the United States and China may change, but the underlying tensions won't disappear. There is a move on the part of the USA towards protectionism. Incidentally, China stands to lose more than the USA. If you just stopped all trade between China and the USA, the amount that China would lose in terms of revenue would probably be double what the USA would lose. And that's why the Chinese leadership, is one of the reasons why the Chinese leadership have begun to develop this Belt and Road Initiative, which is a connectivity project, huge investment in infrastructure that enables countries in the world where there are limits to trade because of things like the size of their railway system, the size of their ports, the capacity of their ships, and you know, other infrastructure factors that have impeded the trade of countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and to some extent even in Europe. This Belt and Road project has been an initiative on the part of China to extend its influence into other areas of world markets. China's economy has made some signs of recovering from the initial shock of COVID, and the Chinese government has exerted very, very stringent measures in areas where COVID has broken out. Incidentally, when COVID first broke out in Wuhan, the government was in a kind of denial, and it was the people of Wuhan who began to introduce a lockdown themselves because they understood the dangers. It was a spontaneous movement from below, organized by citizens. And when the Chinese bureaucracy realized that this was happening and began through the pressure of the citizens to understand that it was necessary, they made a virtue of necessity and claimed the lockdown as their own. China has been able to exert some better controls over the spread of the virus since the bureaucracy's initial huge mistake of being in denial and wanting to cover up the existence of this virus. In terms of world trade, the ruling class globally about 30 years ago hoped that China would gradually evolve into a capitalist country. They hoped that in the same way as some of these liberal politicians imagine that you can have a gradual progression of capitalist society into socialist society, somehow they imagined that you could have a gradual unwinding of a Stalinist society to make it step by step into more of a capitalist society. And that was certainly sections of the Chinese bureaucracy with a hope and a prayer bought into that philosophy, particularly encapsulated in the phrase they used for the relationship between Hong Kong and mainland China, which was one country, two systems. In other words, that there would be some kind of peaceful coexistence between capitalism and a Stalinist state, a state where the state-owned aspect of the economy is still predominant. But the recent developments over the last year or two in Hong Kong have demonstrated absolutely clearly to the bureaucracy that there's no possibility of gradual lifting the lid on their system of government. And the reason for that is because Stalinism is not a necessary stage in the development of human society. It's an aberration. It's a bureaucratic encrustation that has formed above an economy that has been taken over by the state. And in a healthy socialist society, any regime like that is a temporary arrangement as society proceeds towards genuine communism, where democracy prevails, where the intelligence of the working class is used to create efficiencies in production. And this is the answer to those capitalists who, from the time of Adam Smith, have argued that capitalism creates efficiencies because of competition. Capitalism does create efficiencies because of competition, but it's paid for with blood, sweat and tears. And the intelligence of the working class in a planned economy can very easily do away with bureaucrats, with bureaucratic privilege, and it can also bring huge invention and efficiency and a shorter working week, leading to actually eventually the abolition of the distinction between work and recreation. With modern technology, that's possible within a generation. All this is possible in a socialist planned economy, but it's not possible with a privileged elite presiding over a state-owned economy and trying to defend their privileges and trying to maintain their control, which does not allow the full participation of workers in the planning of production. And so the Chinese bureaucracy, having started off with this vague hope that there might be a gradual rewinding of things to have some accommodation between capitalism and Stalinism, have now begun a major clampdown on all human rights in China. You see the repression of the Uyghur people in Western China, and there's huge repression. And that repression is a reflection of the fact that the regime fears the working class. A few years ago, there was a huge strike wave. Tens of thousands of workplaces came out on strike in China. It was hardly reported at all in the West, but it's an indication of the tinderbox, the potential that there is for political revolution in China, the overthrow of bureaucracy. And this partly connects with the point that Finn has raised, I think, twice in this meeting about, how are we going to get a workers' movement that knows what it's doing, that knows where it's going, that can coordinate its activities so that workers can come to power on this planet and begin to plan society rationally. In Poland, in the 1980s, a movement began based on the trade unions that very, very rapidly, within the space of a few weeks, took the proportion of 10 million workers involved in this movement. And from a trade union, it very rapidly became a political party. If there's one country in the world where workers make a move towards taking state power, it will alter the climate in every other country of the world. We can't say in advance whether it will be China, but at some point in the development of events over the next period, the Chinese workers will move to replace their bureaucracy with a democratic regime based on the initiatives and the democratic constructions, democratic methods of organization that the working class can create. And it will be a movement like that that opens up a new consciousness for humanity and opens up the possibility of workers really controlling and democratically owning all the resources of this planet.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Themos from Cyprus and Jabu. Themos, are you ready?
Yes, I want to thank again for the privilege for taking part in this meeting and discussing all these important questions. A lot of things that most of the things that I hear here, I would agree with them fully, but I don't want to spend my time on that because it would be repeating things. I didn't have time to look at the supplementary document sent today, but I want to make a few comments on it that I feel that should be discussed. I am not. I'm a bit uneasy with the stress it is laid on the environmental and biological side of the COVID-19 disease. And although I wouldn't agree more that capitalism is partly responsible for this aspect, I am a bit worried of discussing this in a conference paper. For example, I would not give so much stress on the breaking of barriers between wild and domesticated animals and environments. I would give much more stress on the cruelty of domesticated environments that we create and the health issues raised there. But this is not a matter of a party policy, of a party line. It's something that we should discuss and have it in mind when we form our policies. We have a bad experience of these biological and scientific issues turning into party line issues. For example, in Russian genetics and Russian biology were just thrown out of the world scene, and they were destroyed by Stalinist politics. I would rather prefer much more stress on the COVID-19 as a capitalist structural and management problem. The question of rundown of health systems has been mentioned, and I would also like much more discussion on the police repression measures that were taken and the way capitalism is dealing with this. And also, I think we should discuss more why were capitalist governments everywhere prepared to destroy large swaths of capitalist production and destroy a lot of businesses in something that is becoming a de facto social engineering that it will have immense effects on the post-COVID era. Also, on the same paper, there is one thing I would object to, and this is the statement that imperialism is no longer such a serious threat to revolutionary movements in peripheral countries, and that such movements do not face the threat of direct intervention. That is not the case. We should remember what happened in Greece. We should remember what happened in Libya. We should remember what is happening and what happened in Syria. And I could go on and on and on about this. Imperialist threat is still there, as strong as ever, and which means that not that we should we should revert to nationalist policies against imperialism. We should go on and see world revolution as a continuous process that embraces all of us and in need of a common strategy by all of us in this united process. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Thomas. Jabu is next.
Yes, thank you. Great contributions from everyone. I just wanted to extend my solidarity to Tia and basically just say to her that we are still facing a similar problem in terms of racism in Oxford, in England. With this one thing that this pandemic has exposed is that there's a great link between racism and the pandemic. A week ago, I organized a huge Why Vaccinate meeting, which was basically about the fears that are coming from Black communities, not just in Oxford, but globally, around why they should or shouldn't vaccinate because of the historical context of what's been going on in terms of the scientific experimentation on Black bodies. It was quite a productive meeting, had scientists, had all sorts of people, but even though we had that explanations of from the medical profession and leading scientists in Oxford, you still have this great divide of town and gown, whereby we're talking about cases in Oxford that have gone up in reported about 1,000 cases. Is mostly in the inner city marginalized areas where people are still going to work in comparison to those that are told they can work at home. So there's a great divide in that sense, but and more so, most of these people who are working in these low paying jobs are coming from Black communities. But it is also that racism is showing its face, its ugly face, because the heavy policing of Black communities in terms of who's being disproportionately being given fines and being arrested by the police right across the UK is mostly Black youths who are affected by this. And not only that, we've had a really horrific report from Cardiff, where a young man called Mohammed Hassan was beaten and killed by the police just last week. And there's a big vigil as we speak in London in honor of him. And not only has this affected people, but it's affected people because we cannot protest because of lockdown rules. People, young people are all over the media sending small video clips in solidarity with this young man. And a lot of them are talking about their experiences. And it's not a shock, but it's a shock to think that after the Black Lives Matter movement swept the international scene, the police are still behaving in this way, and they are not fazed or touched. But more than anything, it's the audacity of these what you call these repressive police. We are all constantly being told as soon as they murder another young man, another young Black man, that they will be investigating themselves. And then so therefore we should shut up. And then in a couple of months' time, you find that it's been swept under the carpet. There has never been any police prosecutions when it comes to these deaths of young men in their custody. So there's a great work that needs to be done in terms of what is happening, but the pandemic has definitely exposed the relationship between poverty, inequality, health inequality, educational inequalities in our communities. And we've seen who is mostly affected, the frontline workers who are out there trying to save lives, mostly coming from Black communities, and yet there is no appreciation of all this work that is taking place as people from different from Black backgrounds, which is I say Black politically, giving their lives to actually save lives, and yet their children are being murdered in police cells. They are being murdered they are being criminalized, over criminalized in the street. This has got to stop. It's been going on for decades, and I just feel as if we just keep going round and round the bend, where year after year we hear the same thing, and then we hear the same response. Yes, it will be investigated. The judiciary, the whole criminal justice system is very much in cahoots with capitalism in criminalizing Black bodies, and it is feeling, people are feeling very despondent, because it seems to be global. It's global, and the worst part of it, I think, what's disheartening is when people see it happening in places like South Africa, where they think that once they thought once the eradication of apartheid came into effect, it would mean that Black bodies will no longer be suffering from state oppression through the police forces. But it's still happening. It's happening in Zimbabwe. It's happening all over the world. So yeah, that's my little contribution today, to say in solidarity, Tia, in Louisville, hold it down, and it's this has to stop. This has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jabu. I've now got Hafez speaking from Bangladesh, Larry from Philippines, Olivier from France, Saman from Iran. So
okay, well, welcome, dear comrades, to give me the chance to speak here.
You're very faint. Could you speak up, please?
Yes, I have brought the team with 12 members, all our teachers, with 6 women and 6 men. Also, me and my teams are also working for these people to make the life of the Rohingya students, the students, because here lots of students are lying at home because of without any studying here. Also, they need to improve their life with the best educations, higher educations. So I have brought a team with 12 members, 6 women and 6 men. Also, and I bought manuscript books and pens for each of members of the team, and also to write the notes from the 2020 visions and enter words they don't know. Also, actually, me and my team members are already working for these peoples till 3 years, because I made, actually me and my OIC members are on the way of trying to increase personal education experience every time that can able to do more works in the future life for everyone. Also, we are also should prepare budget for this is called for Phoenix on the school international care. Although we are working with the WIN and for the school and our people in every time. Okay, and then some websites says that they are schools. in the camps. But there's no more educations. There is just grade 1 in the schools, which has been held, which has been donated by the international NGOs in these relief camps in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar. But there is no more educations, just grade 1, and students are playing, and sometimes they are reading the books, just the books of the alphabet A, B, C, D. That's all. So there is no big education schools. So that's why we are making the case for the Phoenix Rohingya school. So there is no other school in our camps. So it is very important to make in this camps, because these peoples are like sunless the world. Because education is the light of the world. So these peoples are also getting down in every time, because also we have lost our right of fundamental, because we don't have higher education. So we are lost in everything. So these people and the students are the most needed thing is just education. That's why we are making, and my team members and me, every time we are making, we are trying to improve the life of these people. So we are making now the case for the Phoenix Rohingya schools in this camps. Okay, there is no other school in this camps. So otherwise, in this camps, there are lots of students in this camps. Also, there are some people there have been burnt down by the fire, burnt down in the fire in every time Kutupalong. There are lots of villages just burnt down. There are lots of houses by the fire, because unfortunately they can't control the fire in their homes, in their shelters. So they have been burned down a lot of shelters. But also many thousands more people are now homeless in these situations. So
thank you.
and then it's this, and I said we are committed to the business projects to reach people through events in their schools. Okay, also committed to the international corporations and social assistance. Also, just I have read the 2020 visions, and also I have wrote the options and the points in our notebooks. Every time I studied it, and I revisit it. And every time also my team members are already reading. Also, they are just trying how to improve this people's test. They're very hungry to make everything for this people's. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, let's ask. Okay?
Yep, thank you very much. Larry, are you ready from Philippines?
Well, as recently, the president remarked that presidency is not for a woman, and that's sad to hear, because we know that women can contribute a lot to change our society, and here comes our president giving that remarks. The more we have to educate and organize our women and our society to fight and assert their rights. And also, I would like to ask and how to address, to expose the connection with this capitalism and this pandemic that affects our society now. No?
Okay. All right, thanks, Larry. Olivier, are you there?
Yes.
Yes. It's me?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
about the French situation. There are two immediate needs to be solved: the ban on dismissal layoffs and a health emergency plan to protect and effectively treat the population. Two causes. First, the economic crisis combined with the health crisis. The bosses of the large groups take the opportunity to reorganize their firms through mass layoffs. They are the big groups that receive the most subsidies and loans guaranteed by the state. On the contrary, small patrons in bars, restaurants, sport halls, concert halls, the entire cultural sector, theater, musicians, and all forms of live performance, exhibition, museum. Culture is a very large economic sector in France with a lot of small businesses. They do not receive as much as the large groups. They are strangled by the clauses imposed for health reasons, and it is they who will lay off hundreds of thousands of employees. A second cause is the health crisis with the coronavirus. Everyone thinks that within a few days, if not a few weeks, the government will declare a new general containment. At the present time, there is only a curfew at 6 p.m. At 6 p.m. starting this Saturday evening, after a curfew at 8 p.m. Until now. This is the result of the negligence of the government, which in the first phase of the crisis, from February to June, after denying or minimizing the danger, was unable to produce masks and gel to help stop the contaminations, while at the same time, hospitals were exploding under the wave of seriously ill patients. This situation highlighted the lack of resources and staff in the public hospital. Today, the government is doing it again by being unable to organize a mass vaccination campaign within a time frame allowing rapid coverage of a very large part of the population. The only thing that this government is doing very well is to produce liberticidal measures to prevent travel or impose documents who are unnecessary on a medical level, but useful to impose fines on hundreds of thousands of people who do not have the right document on them at the right time. Unable to vaccinate properly, the government continues to cut beds and staff in hospitals. It blatantly lies by claiming to have given more resources to the public hospital when it is not. People are tired, people are afraid to getting sick, especially the elderly and sick, diabetes, heart disease, etc. Popular sectors affected by unemployment are knocking at the door of food banks and charities to be able to eat due to lack of income. Students are with no income without wealthy parents are in dire situation. No more jobs with fast food closure, social isolation, difficulty for eating and paying housing rents. No one is happy with this government, but it is holding on because the left does not question it by denouncing its inability to provide the immediate needs of the population, and while waiting for the presidential election of 2022. Macron said that he will do something terrible in 2021, which might prevent him from running for the presidential election in 2022. But faced with this admission, the union leadership accepted the path of social dialogue, or by organizing traditional days of action without a future. In terms of public and individual freedoms, the government is in the process of passing a new law known as global security, which aims to increasingly criminalize social mobilization and demonstration. Even before the adoption of the new law, a new decree was adopted allowing the recording of political, union, religious opinions, all personal aspects, your sexual orientation, your family, your friends, etc., of all active and non-activists. Today in France, going to a demonstration in Paris as well as in provincial town becomes dangerous. The government is giving police total impunity by promising to ban the recording and broadcasting of police violence. There is nothing to negotiate with this government. We must get rid of it so that society can operate on a more rational basis to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Thanks, Conrad, for your listening.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. Thank you very much. Now I've got Aman from Iran, and then I hope that we'll get a better connection with Rob from South Africa. Aman, are you ready?
Yes, I am. I'm hoping that you can hear me. I'm sorry, but because of the Wi-Fi, I'm turning my videos off and then put it on as we go along. First of all, solidarity to everybody, and it was great to actually hear a variety and range of reports on different issues. I know we don't have much time, so I'm not going to take much time. I'm just going to mention some couple of points. I think with regard to the issue of Corona, obviously everybody is everywhere saying that the recognition of one fact, and that is that capitalism has actually, or its crisis has actually been exposed immensely through the issue or notion of COVID on one hand, and everybody can see what the states have actually shown their inability to be able to actually protect the basic, i.e. the safety of people at least, through lack of recognition of the need for investment in health because of the lack of profits, etc., etc. And I think that's what we're seeing everywhere, irrespective of the strategies they've taken, whether it is in Sweden or whether that is in UK, US, or even that of Iran. The rate is so high that everybody can see that the lack of ability of states to actually produce anything. And that was, I think, mentioned to a large extent in the pamphlet supplement that was done there as well. There are 2 points which I wanted to very, very quickly mention with regard to the supplement, and not to discuss them, but just to mention them, be taken into account. I think one was mentioned earlier, the idea of the notion that UK or US would not, or the imperialism would not be taking part in terms of foreign or, if you like, abroad activities. I think that was probably need to be rewarded simply because it gives the impression as if imperialism is only military. And the military is when you actually see the army, rather than actually recognition of the use of capital in terms of intervention, of what imperialism actually is. So that probably needs rewarding, and it gives the impression that the fact of military intervention, if you like, the role of even of the US, is going to be changing as the military superpower and its role in the international competition that is taking place, even in the trade war with China. I think that probably needs rewarding a little bit. Another issue which I think was on the supplement, which probably needs relooking at, is the notion that it says that, or it does mention it in a couple of places. On one place it says, because of the changes and because of the variety of movements that are taking place, it has given impetus to the labor or working class to some extent to start moving. And it talks about bringing stuffy or changing the stuffy air in the union offices. That again needs to be looked at, because it gives a feeling that it's the other movements which give impetus to the workers' movement rather than the other way around. So the class nature seems to be taking the second step rather than the first step on there. And the third point, which I think probably needs to be relooked at on the pamphlet, it says that given the variety of movements, the format of the structure in terms of strategy for power has changed to become more of a flatter structure. And I think that's more of a management talk rather than a class talk. In a class talk, the idea of hierarchy is very different from the hierarchy that we talk in management. The idea of a flat structure, which is more of a management talk, does not apply to class struggle. The idea of centralism, democratism in class structure comes through hierarchy. And I think that is something which is in the pamphlet gives a more of a management look rather than actually a class look and a class alternative approach to the view of the strategy for power. Thanks very much. And as I said, great to hear everybody talking on it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Oman. Rob, let's hope we can hear you this time.
This is on climate change, the climate catastrophe that's looming. We have had a presentation from Roger on COVID. The climate change issue is similar in that it affects the whole world. It's a global phenomenon. The difference is that it's going to be with us continually, and it's going to increase for the next foreseeable future. This slide shows the average temperatures. The 1.5 degrees is what the scientists say the Earth can handle without too many disruptions, without too much devastation. But you can see we are going up pretty steadily, and what scientists now say is that there's very little chance that we'll stay within the 1.5 degrees. So what the prospects are worsening floods, hurricanes, droughts, fires, etc. And the frequency of catastrophes of different kinds around the world are going to increase. Just very quickly, this is global emissions by country. The large pink section of the pie is China. You probably can't see it very well.
We can't see anything.
Then there's the rest of the world, that gray section, which is all the small countries that are too small to show on this pie. Then the next one is United States, 15% of global emissions. Then India, 7%. Then Russian Federation, 5%. So you can see that the Chinese contribution to greenhouse gases is enormous.
Rob, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Future.
Rob, your screen sharing thing is not working so far. So we can hear you fine, but we can't see anything. I don't know if you can sort that out or if you can just carry on talking.
So the point is that the two main greenhouse gas emitters are China and the United States, with then India, Russia, and then Japan and Germany after that. So although what China does is incredibly important, the actions of the United States are probably even more important in how they could affect the rest of the world. Then if you look at emissions by sector, you'll see that most emissions are from the generation of electricity. That's about a quarter of all emissions, but there are also huge emissions from agriculture, from industry, and from transport. Electricity is the one where there's been quite a lot of technical advance with renewables, and that has been happening partly because the market has facilitated it. But for most of the other emissions, it'll require considerable state intervention to do anything. I just want to talk about the protest movement, because you will all know that for the past 2 years or 3 years, there have been international protests, the school protest, Fridays for Future, and various other similar names for the school protest movement, and then also Extinction Rebellion, which is very active in the UK, but also has affiliates from different parts of the world. Now, the protests have ebbed a little bit over the past year, and I think a lot of that has been due to COVID. But there are new protests that are planned. I think February, March, there's going to be a new school strike. So those protests are going to come back. In terms of the leadership of these protests, certainly Extinction Rebellion, the leaders have been pretty middle class in where they come from. And although they embrace protests, they claim largely to be non-political, and they go so-called beyond politics, and they haven't really got any serious political program. It's just protests against what governments are doing. They call for citizens' assemblies, which are basically, I suppose you could say, talk shops in which people are selected to come and discuss the climate. But obviously very little happens after these citizens' assemblies. There are quite a few calls for system change in the climate movement, not very much analysis of what the system change means. And there's little or no understanding of the need to protect jobs, which is going to be vital to for millions of workers who work in greenhouse emitting industries. And it's also going to be vital for the climate movement itself if they're going to get the support of workers. There is also some kind of movement or ideas about so-called degrowth, that is reducing the size of economies. In Roger's presentation, he did mention scientists briefly, and said that they had not really come forward with the same bravery and forthright explanation and denunciation of leaders as some of the school leaders like Greta Thunberg. But there are certainly some very prominent scientists who have been very vocal in their criticism of governments. There's the well-known scientist Bill McKibben, who in 2016 released a document called A World at War, and he called the Paris Climate Accord equivalent to Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time, just before the Second World War. In other words, a celebration of an achievement which in fact means very, very little. And he and a few other scientists have talked of the need for the state to intervene in a huge central way to reorganize the way that economies work, to close down fossil fuel industries, and to start with renewables and other important initiatives to reduce greenhouse emissions. Bill McKibben, and of them, there are a number of others, and there's also a book that's been written by
Rob, you're cutting out again now.
academic. Am I fading away?
I'm sorry, your connection seems to be going again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Well, yes.
Oh dear. It's still not hearing.
Sometimes, yes, but keep going. Let's give it another try.
Okay. Well, anyway, this book actually talks about it has quite a lot about the COVID and the issue of the destruction of forests, rainforests, and how that has contributed towards the, and he compares state.
Rob, I'm sorry, it's going. We're not hearing you. I've got Comrade Soteris from Cyprus.
Yes, not exactly from Cyprus. All my political life, I have been a member of the left wing with Themos and other comrades, but I live and work politically in Greece over the last 4 years. Can you hear me well, Roger?
Yes.
I will touch only on one question that is there in the document, the first document. The second, I didn't have the time to read. And it was touched by a number of comrades, how we move forward. And in answering these questions, you have to be specific on how we deal with the traditional parties of the working class. In Greece, as I suppose you are all aware, Syriza, a radical left party, seized power, was elected to government in 2015, giving hopes and aspirations to the Greek working class movement, and also to millions of Europeans that followed the events. 5 months, almost 6 months after its election, it organized a referendum at which it gave the right to the Greek people to decide whether they would reject the policies of the European Union of austerity or accept them. 62% of the Greek people voted against the policies of the European Union at a period at which the European bodies closed the Greek banks, creating a huge problem in the economy, and still people had the courage to vote against their proposals by 62%. In reality, opening the way, giving the green light to their government to reject the policies and clash with the European Union bodies. In a cowardice way, the government of Syriza, Tsipras at that time, betrayed capitulated, betrayed the aspirations of the Greek population and also of these millions of Europeans that were following. A creation of this betrayal, a product of this betrayal was the creation of Mera 25 by Varoufakis, if you know him, the finance minister of Greece during the time of the negotiations with the European Union. It's a part of a European movement called DiEM, if you are aware of, giving an international perspective to its struggle. Now, this party was finally elected. It is represented now in the Greek government, in the Greek parliament. And if you see the program of this party led by Varoufakis, it could easily be a transitional program of any Marxist organization. It speaks about the necessity of nationalizing the banking system, and it goes as far as to mention about, to propose about how we control socially this state banking system by elected representatives of various bodies. It's a very, very progressive. It's an amazing program, but there is a big problem in this program, in this party. If you participate, and I participate, I am a member of this party now. During discussions, you feel that this party is more anti-Syriza, instead of being more anti-Syriza than anti-right-wing party. And I feel that this will produce create a big problem in reaching the people of Syriza. Syriza is still there. If there were elections, it could probably get not just 20 or 25%, but under circumstances even seize government again. So the question of how we face this parties is going to be there. The betrayals we are going to see by the leaders of the traditional parties of the working class are unimaginable. And this will make many times probably the most advanced layers of the working class to face with hostility these parties. This is a thing we will have to face and be careful. The right wing, our basic point must be that the right wing is our class enemy, and the leaders of this party, these traitors, are just, they are not our class enemies. They are the leaders that betray our movement, that they don't have good enough policies to be able to confront the right wing and the capitalist system. In a case we are able to build a mass party of the working class, so as long as we are a tendency, you have to be very careful of how we deal with these parties. The most preferable way, if we are able to do that, is to participate. But even if we are not allowed to participate in these parties, we have to make sure that all the workers there feel that we disagree with their leaders, but we consider ourselves as part of them. And even when we are able to build a party of the working class, a Marxist party, we have to keep being very careful in how we face these parties. We never keep equal distances between these parties and the right-wing parties. We always strive to find areas, questions which really are crucial to the society and propose blocks with these parties in a way to expose their unwillingness to really coming to confront the capitalist system. This question of how we face the traditional parties of the working class is something we will have to face again and again, and probably it's going to be, if not the most, one of the most decisive factors in our whether we are able finally to reach the working class or not. Thank you, comrades. And again, I feel privileged to participate in this discussion.
Thank you very much, comrade. That's a great contribution. I'm going to, unless there's anybody got a very, very quick question or contribution, I'm now going to ask David to reply to the discussion. Anybody want to come in quickly first? It's been a fantastic discussion. We've had comrades participating from 13 countries. We've had a total of 19 countries participating in the last session and this one, and I feel very proud to be part of this organization. So, David, over to you.
You know, a period that we're in has been a period of paralysis, and now it's a great awakening of peoples, of nations, and particularly of the working class. I want to deal with the question of paralysis first of all. Someone has raised in the discussion the question of respect or non-respect for scientists and their ability to speak out. This lady here, Debbie Birx, is very well known to our family. I won't go in a little bit more into that. But there she is. Trump has just said, you inject yourself with chlorine and you'll survive and it'll get rid of COVID in one particular swell move. And there she is looking at him before she put her head down in utter shame. Now if that woman was my mother, she would have stood up and said, "Excuse me, sir, you are talking complete nonsense," she would have become the hero of the nation, and he would have been reduced to a flattened balloon. But she didn't. And she's squirming on and hoping to hold on to some position among the Democrats and the Democratic administration, when she's actually sacrificed publicly every hope that she had of being recognized publicly as a scientist. The strategy of these scientists is, well, let's keep within the tent and maybe we'll be able to persuade the man. When she obviously knew right from the beginning that there was no possibility of talking to complete idiots and fools and fascists and getting them to accept science. But she didn't act. And so through the silence and the paralysis of the labor movement in America, the liberals, the radicals even, who are inept in terms of mobilization, and the whole establishment of America, which it claims to have a rational outlook, we've seen the triumph, at least for a while, of the most terrible reaction that America has faced for maybe 180 years or longer. And part of this reaction, and this is where you might find that I've bent the stick in the notes that have been circulated, is that women have been silenced. I give in the arguments on the notes a reference to the rights of man and to the Declaration of Independence that proclaims that all men are created equal. Behind the rights of man, of course, there are no women have rights. Most men don't have rights, only men who have property and those who are over 25 years old. Artists and actors are not allowed to participate. Domestic servants are not allowed to vote. Nobody who has not paid poll tax in America was allowed to vote. In other words, a few people were allowed onto the platform of so-called democracy, even revolutionary democracy of the time. And the other, quote unquote, other, was everybody else thrown into a dustbin and not participating. And why I'm stressing this point is that we cannot understand the period we are in unless we understand that people's, nations, and the whole of the women, the whole gender, called women, are actually moving into public participation. And that is a world historic change. Now, how's the patriarchal system responded? Here you see a woman, I forget her name, but her first name is Judith, her second name is Palaga, a Hungarian. In the early 1990s, her father trained her with the ambition of becoming a chess master. And by the age of 4, she was able to defeat men. Why I'm stressing the point about men is that women were herded in the press fraternity, in the profession called chessmen, as in a particular separate group called women. And they were not allowed to compete. This is in the 1990s. Were not allowed to compete against men. And when she was 8 years old, she issued a challenge to the grandmasters of the time. I think it was Kasparov, and he refused to play with her. He refused the contest. Eventually, she took him on when I think she was 11 years old, but by the time she got to 12, she beat him again and again and again. And she became the world master the chess person, let me use the term. And she proved, but she had, at every time she was told she was not allowed to compete with men. And now we see women moving into action in a most extraordinary manner. Here's a celebrated young woman in Lebanon who, against the advice of her parents and against the advice of her brothers and everybody else, took to the streets in opposition to the corrupt, riddled with corruption administration there in Lebanon. And of course, she faced gas being thrown at her, gas canisters being thrown at her. And instead of running from the scene, she took out a tennis racket and played the tear gas back at the soldiers and got herself photographed to boot. And again, I want to show a picture which has a bit more of a story. This is someone very dear to me. In mid-1990, Ntokozo Mbele, I joined her and we negotiated the first agreement for seamen, for any seaman, S-E-A-M-E-N, in South Africa. And we negotiated with the companies, with the workers, had full confidence in her. And I asked one of the workers here photographed, why have you got such confidence in Ntokozo? I said it with a smile. And he immediately said, when you have a woman in leadership in the labor movement, you know she's not going to steal the money and she's going to do a fantastic job. We are 100% behind Ntokozo. Now, why is Ntokozo now not one of the leaders of the labor movement in South Africa? Why is she still a secretary, a person in the administration of one of the largest unions? And the reason is her incredible ability was recognized around the world, and she got a scholarship to work for a year in Rotterdam in Holland. And the Dutch labor movement wanted to celebrate her achievements. As soon as that news came through the Transport and General Workers Union, one of the unions that I helped found in Durban in 1973, the entire leadership of the union said, Ntokozo, you've been doing such hard work in organizing the seamen and the dock workers. I think it's about time that you started to organize the bus drivers. So Ntokozo was put on to organizing the bus drivers, which he did. I advised her to fight again to hold her position. But she said, no, let's go along. Maybe it'll be for my good. The Dutch labor unions canceled the opportunity for anybody to learn with them because, as you could imagine, those that were on the executive committee of the Transport and General Union thought that they would love to have a holiday in Holland, in Rotterdam for a year. So they pushed her out of that position completely. The Dutch union said, no, if we're going to have a man, we'll have nobody. So nobody went. And the union movement started to falter. This is in 1990. And when some people ask, well, what about, the stale smell in the union movement offices? I have to say, those unions that we fought to be worker-led unions in the 1970s have become bureaucratic operations, which are actually not effectively representing the interests of the workers and are denying women the role. And Ntokozo should have been one of the great leaders of the labor movement in South Africa, but she was crushed. So we have to be aware of patriarchy as our enemy and the enemy within. The enemy within. Here's a picture of a young comrade. His name is Stompie Sapai. I think at this time, he was 12 years old when this picture was taken. He was the most incredible comrade organizing the struggle in Johannesburg and on the East Rand. He had memorized the entire text of the Freedom Charter. He knew it word for word. He was an outstanding comrade in every possible way, and he was only 12 years old. He was taken into the embrace of the Mandela family. And within 8 months, he was dead. The talent of our young comrades is seen by those in the establishment as extremely dangerous. The ability of African youth to stand up in Uganda and fight for democracy is denied. People are slaughtered in the streets. The West, those democratic civilized countries, offer not a little finger of help. And the older patriarchal order suppresses and kills off the promise of youth. And then, just in case you feel I'm getting a little too somber, let me show you something else. Africa is devastated. This is a picture of what in South Africa we are called dongas. In England or the English language, the term generally is gullies. It's the ravaging, the destruction of the topsoil in our countries, in Africa, in Asia, and all around the world. Devastation. And this is the result partly of cropping procedures, of herding procedures, but largely also of climate change taking place now. Our land is reduced to rubble. But here's the hope. This is Lakou Desta, one of the most marvelous scientists I've ever had the privilege to work with. He is so fit, he jumps like a goat from rock to rock. I struggled to keep up with him. He gathered the children around him and he said, "Children, you have to do this. We have to save the land." He ran around one place to the other. We were meant to be traveling on the road and on our destination to a hotel. He refused to move until he'd done the job and gathered the whole community and pointed out exactly how the land would be restored. In another section, I'll show you what he did achieve and what the land looks like now. I had to show you Lakou Desta because in the midst of misery, there he is. That picture is taken in Somalia, in war-torn Somalia, where he could be kidnapped and killed at any moment. And there is Lakou jumping around and getting the communities organized. There's hope. There's more than hope. And I'm saying this because actually the facts are despair. More despair and even more despair. There's no way out on our current basis that we can actually save our planet and to save ourselves. And the reason is capitalism, but now we use that term. Now, what does it mean actually? If you look at the notes, I was so convinced. I was lying on the bed listening to the BBC and someone put it over. Sometimes we have to have things explained to us in so many different ways and suddenly we get it. In economics, you have the costs that you face. When you buy a pencil, no one is thinking about where did you get that lead from, where did that wood come from and all the rest of it. It's all contained in one price. But there's something called externalities. External meaning after you paid for the price of it, who else is paying for that thing? In other words, the transport, the emissions, the digging of the mines and the ruining of the environment. Not that much has come from digging pencils, but when you start burning oil, you are creating one hell of a mess. And that is not factored in. Men have the right to rape and they have the right to rape the planet. But capitalism is leading the assault. And how is it working? Well, the figure was this that I heard on the radio. For every $8 you spend on fossil fuel, on oil, the earth, that is saying all of us, and poor old Mother Nature herself, is paying $28. So a ratio of 1 to 4. The ratio of 1 is what you're spending in using fossil fuel, and times 4 for the rest of the world. But capitalism doesn't pick that bill up. No, thank you. That's free. Free gratis and for me. It's mine. And I can use it as I wish. That's what the capitalist spirit is. And Mother Nature, don't mess with her because she will get revenge. And boy, you will see it. And so we are struggling from a period where Boris Johnson said we'd have a lockdown for 2 weeks. I think that was in March last year. And now we got lockdown, and more lockdown, because actually there's no way out on a capitalist basis that we're actually solving the problem, especially when the labor movement is on mute, is divided, and is struggling in a way to be able to speak to power. So our task is actually to get power, to be able to bring all this together and to talk, to organize ourselves so that we can speak to power and then take power. Now, there are questions being raised, and I must thank the comrades so much, for the questions being raised, because it does show that even though, and I apologize to the comrades, that those notes came in late. It's very difficult actually to write simply at the moment, but there it is. It's very difficult, particularly at the moment in America, where I am, because it's crisis after crisis after crisis. Everything which was apparently real has crumbled and been put in, as I mentioned once before, in a crucible. It's been burnt to ashes, or to find, as Plato would put it, where the gold is, where the iron is, where the copper, where the bronze is. And so we are sifting out through the process of fire. We're emerging through fire and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And we're seeing a catastrophic crisis here. If I could just mention it in general terms, first of all, that the so-called illustrious democracy of America is no democracy at all. When America has emerged from the period of slavery and the Reconstruction, I was thinking about it. When Lincoln was assassinated, and the Republicans of that period lost the ability to be able to develop a reconstruction, which would actually bring a change, a radical transformation in the lives of former slaves. In fact, we had a reconstruction from which we are still suffering, because white supremacy rose then, and we're still struggling with white supremacy now. And white supremacy is the most deadly anti-democratic force known to mankind. And we are struggling, with its consequences. And why I was so keen to hear Tia this morning is that when we look at any particular situation, we see that lynching is not stopped. It's just become more official. In the past, we would see groups of white, usually the day class, the dispossessed, coming together and having a party by hanging a black person on a tree, a cruel and bitter fruit. And there it was, and it was recognized, and even white South Africans, with all their racism, were appalled at what they saw. But America has now made lynchings official, and just when everything is reformed, things seem to be going okay for a month or two, and then we hear of some young black person, young black boy or younger man shot, not once, not twice, but 47 times. What has happened in the mind of someone who pulls the trigger 47 times and kills a person who's already dead? It's something unspeakable. And yet that's what's taking place. It's less than it was, sure, that's a sort of reform. But then it erupts in the most terrible way, as we've seen in the Capitol, in the assaults and the attempt to take over the Capitol, which very nearly succeeded. They very nearly succeeded in burning all the results of the 50 states, and to say to Donald Trump, carry on with your rule forever, because we've destroyed the evidence that you failed. And the Republican Party, which claimed to be democratic, is actually carrying on in pursuing the conspiracy theory that they actually won the election and denied that they lost the election. And on the radio this morning, I couldn't hardly believe my ears. One of the most senior people in security says we've covered just about everywhere in Washington. You can hardly walk in Washington now because the troops are everywhere. Imagine that. But we fear for the results in something like 40 of the states because we do not have enough National Guards to be able to secure those. I almost want to volunteer to become part of the National Guard and put down these, anyway. Because they're running short of troops now to be able to protect their own capitals. And the BBC interviewer said, but surely that's not a problem because you could just put a few guys there and you would stop these fellows trying to take over the capitals. And anyway, it's all closed down. So what's the problem? And the answer was, the enemy is within. Republican politicians are carrying arms into the capital, are showing around the fascists, semi-fascists, and racists around and showing them where they can get in and break through into the seats of power in the capitals in each state and in Washington itself. There was a vast conspiracy, a real conspiracy, not a pretend conspiracy, that the Republicans actually took those crazy boys and took them around and showed them around Capitol the day before. That was on the 5th of January. On the 6th, they were then well equipped and known just how they could get in. Of course, it was chaotic, it was American, it was bizarre. But in the midst of the bizarre, there was reaction showing its face. And who put up the resistance? Well, the black policemen, it seems, if you could see the evidence of your eyes, and did a fantastic job. But in society, there was paralysis because actually crazy things were going on and no one knew quite what. But where there is resistance, it comes from Black Lives Matter, from the black communities who have their churches under assault. You find Black Lives Matter posters being burnt and smashed to the ground because Black Lives Matter is exactly what these people don't want to see. So we see reaction coming up, and it seems quite powerful, but it's actually a mess. It's part of a deep mess in the ruling class's strategy, not that it has a strategy, or in the strategy of the Democrats or the Republicans, but they don't really have a strategy. In democracy, the freedom is to be able to make the alliances which are possible and which you are prepared to make. And so in the freedom, you might find a situation in America, as we've seen historically in Italy, where there are periods of even a year or 2 years where no one's actually in power. Things go on there. But then in Italy, there were not major issues in contest. In the United States of America, there are major issues in contest, and it happens to be the pandemic, which is killing as never before, and yet in which the population is numbed, hardly daring to raise an issue if you listen to the radio, the local radios. And the BBC's in interviewing key politicians is absolutely bemused that there's not a sense of disaster. But on the other hand, we have to know that when we do face pandemics, as we found in South Africa, experts would come around to South Africa and to ask South African health departments and key hospital people, how are you dealing with HIV/AIDS? How are you dealing with this existential crisis? And the people are saying, what are you talking about? There's no crisis here. It's a myth. The minister of health at the time, Monty Shabalala, she said, take a little bit of garlic and maybe a bit of beetroot too, and you're okay. Thabo Mbeki said, there's no such thing as a disease called HIV/AIDS. It's just that people are poor. And so as they are poor, they are dying off. He had to explain how people suddenly got very, very poor under his shift, but it was denied. And throughout even America, on the left circles, many people supported Thabo Mbeki, said, yes, that's right. He's right on, and he's showing that it's a white myth that there's something called HIV/AIDS. And science was abused then, and it's being abused now. The scientific conclusions are not being presented as they should, and the implementation of programs for the survival of the people of each country and for humanity as a whole is scattered. Well, it's the best you can say in terms of the strategy. And instead of that, we are facing the most incredible array of myths and conspiracy myths and so forth. Now, why have we got into this position? If you think about it, it arose in the period after the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008. Capitalism realized it was in a serious problem. And instead of that, it's not as though the ruling class decided on the strategy of populism as a whole. No, it didn't. It would much prefer someone like Angela Merkel, who would have a quiet policy and to go ahead and have a sort of rational discourse. But now you've got the crazies coming in, and they're also not opposed to that, because the crazy people, the Trumps of the world, will cut down the tax. So maybe it's not a bad deal. Let them do the things. But the bigger, that's only the small part of it. The bigger thing is, instead of class consciousness, we find false consciousness, a crazy false consciousness, which is pulverizing the working class, poor working people, confusing them utterly. What a Thanksgiving for the capitalist class to know that the ordinary people of the world, particularly here in America, are so confused they do not identify their interests and they cannot fight for their rights. It's unbelievable, but there's the evidence in front of your eyes. So we have to give thought. What creates this great irrationality? When a dentist that I go to asks me, do you believe in climate change? He obviously doesn't. He's incredibly well, he's a lovely person, nice person. He actually didn't even charge me the last time I went to the dentist. But he doesn't believe in climate change. And maybe I didn't want to go any further. Who knows, he might believe in QAnon and God knows what else. In other words, even educated people in America are caught up in these incredible fantasies. They do not believe in geology in the sense that you can look at the rocks and there's evolution, but they don't believe in evolution. It's extraordinary. It goes beyond measure. But what does it mean? It means that large sections of the working population of America cannot calculate their interests. That's a scientific exercise. Do I win, or am I winning, or am I losing? Am I winning or am I losing? And it seems they're saying you're winning, you're winning, you're winning, when you are losing, losing, losing. It's as though we are all entered into some great gamble. And the gamble is something like 3 million to 1. 3 million chance that we're going to lose, and 1 single unit that we might just possibly win. And yet everyone's in gambling that somehow or other we can avoid the consequences of climate change. We can avoid the consequences of externalities, the fact that we are pushing tons, I mean, the billions of tons. If you can imagine, if you put your hand up, can you feel the weight of air? But you can't. But if you assemble this in terms of an external view of it all, we find that we have billions of tons of CO2, so light that it just is in the air, tons of CO2 being emitted, every year. It's beyond belief, but there it is. It's actual fact. Now we struggle with the question of how to turn all this around. I've tried to, in the argument that's presented in the notes, and please, comrades, read it skeptically. It's not the tablets of Moses. It's something for debate. We are faced with the question of how do we get to a revolutionary change? And boy, we need a revolution to be able to turn around what we see in front of our eyes. And the answer from the sects, and even some of our comrades, well, let's call it our periphery. Roger and I have had a debate with a comrade who's actually very good. I won't say the analogy which I drew from the Bible, because I was forced to read or listen to the Bible every single day. I'll save you the young man that came to see Christ in the middle of the night. But he's like that. He's a nice person and he's full of good qualities. But when it comes to the point when the network that we've got is not good enough, Now, why is it not good enough? Because it's not a revolutionary party. It is not constituted exactly as according to the tablets of Moses as he reads them into what is to be done. You've got to have a leader. You've got to have a central committee there which issues edicts. You've got to have democratic centralism so that every member actually responds as a soldier does to a command and just runs and does whatever they're told to do. That is what a revolutionary party is. But actually, that's a non-starter. If you look at the landscape around us, Ted used to talk about 57 varieties. I thought it was of soup, but apparently it was of Heinz's other things, such as I think it was tinned beans. Anyway, there's varieties aplenty. So it's Heinz. And those are all the sects which are out there. They're probably a bit fewer now because some of them just give up and go home. But others are strutting around trying to say, we'll save everybody, just come to us. But actually, they're not even ready. They're not even able. They're not able to rise to the occasion. In some previous discussion, I mentioned that when I was a boy, a young man, I had the idea after finding that the student movement in South Africa was going nowhere because we were protesting and nothing was changing. So, we read what is to be done. We read the Communist Manifesto and we read Wage, Labor and Capital. And we came to the astonishing idea, which no one else had thought of, isn't that bizarre? That maybe organizing the Black working class in South Africa was a way in which to overthrow the entire racist system and to bring democracy to South Africa and socialism too. No one else had the idea. And everyone said it wasn't going to work. Even Steve Biko said, well, go for it, see what you do. He sort of laughed. He's a marvelous person, by the way, but I'm just talking about it. We went to see the workers who were sitting around drinking beer out of paraffin tins, gallon tins. They would drink the beer in a gallon and would pass it around. You sat on a stone. The place was totally dilapidated. And we went there and we said, can we speak to you? In my broken Zulu, I managed to get there. And they said, sure, take a seat. And they indicated, and they called one of the guys. They said, here's a young man among us. He can Khuluma's English, you see, he can speak Zulu and English and translate. So we sat down and we drank from a tin of beer, Uchwala. It's actually quite thick beer, it's not clear beer. And then we told them what we wanted to do. And they looked at me and they said, where have you been? Where have you been? We had expected this to have come 30 years ago, and now you've turned up so late. We want to organize, and sure enough, we organized the abattoir workers, one of the most militant group of workers in Durban. I'll leave it off, but in the sense that we have to ask ourselves, when the big movements come, we have 47 movements that Roger registered the other day that are rising and demanding power, across every continent of the world. Not one of them has a revolutionary party. Not one of them even got the beginnings of a workers' party, maybe a bit here and a bit there, but actually nothing of consequence. The question then comes to us, when these big movements take place, it's not whether you're ready or you've already got a revolutionary party in place. It's how are you listening to the workers' movement? Are you listening to the women's movement and to the other movements which are springing up demanding democracy and national liberation? Are you listening? And are you able then to provide the right answers at the right time? Because it's not just all the answers that are somewhere in a book. It's actually the answers which relate right to here and now. Comrades, I've gone on a bit, but can I just deal with some quick points because I really must respect those who've done their reading. First of all, in relation to the intervention of imperialism and the prospects of whether it's greater or lesser. Maybe I should have put it a bit more carefully, but maybe not. Just consider this. In the past, I think Lebanon's been invaded by America probably 7 or 9 times. It's just when they don't like a government, they used to send the troops in and reorganize things. Same in Haiti. In the backwaters of America and Latin America and Central America. I mean, intervention was, I wouldn't say a daily event, but every year you'd have 2 or 3 new interventions. They would go into Panama and reconstitute there and then have a, leave that for a bit. Every so often they tried to do a big one, like to invade Cuba and to overthrow Castro. Boy, oh boy, did they find they had a bloody nose from trying out that little trick. Now, all I'm saying, but maybe we should put it in carefully, but just consider this. There's no way that American imperialism after Vietnam, after the devastating consequences of the war in Iraq and the prospects of war in Iran, sure, they'll be threatening and threatening and threatening, but do they actually want to do it? Well, maybe if they could do it all from the air, yes. Well, yes, but actually maybe no too, because actually that also doesn't work, because you have to have what they call boots on the ground. You cannot control a nation, you cannot control a people unless you actually have that control right down to the streets and right down to the houses and so forth. You can't just patrol from the sky, although it does help to have a huge air force. So look, the appetite, if I can put it this way, the appetite for intervention is gone. Even Trump didn't intervene anywhere. He would have loved to have a good war because he would present himself as the savior of the nation. But actually, he couldn't. And he doesn't even want to, because actually the American people, if I can quote someone who's very close to me, was saying, we are tired. We are tired. We are so tired. That is a person who suffered racism, who suffered every injustice that apartheid could offer, and suffer all the disadvantages, but also advantages of America, because this is the homeland here. And yet, what is happening is extremely tiring. Why? Because if you're a white person of any dignity whatsoever, you are sick and tired of racists going and shooting black youth and shooting them 47 times as though they're out of their minds. Sick of it. You want to vomit over such people. Who wants that? No one wants a society like that apart from the crazies. That is not law and order. That's not peace. People want something better. America can be better, and they know it. So it's not as though people are going along with what is happening. There's a deep awakening from below, and that paralysis which I showed in the picture of Debbie Birx, it's now being broken. On the Zoom chats, which are linking the parts of the civil service in America on a national basis, there was one law, and it was repeated and repeated and repeated in the last I'd say about 4 or 5 weeks, that you do not discuss any politics whatsoever on your Zoom chats, not even a little joke or anything like that. It's totally prohibited. Last week, on the 6th of January, the lines were buzzing. People were talking and they were appalled and they were angry. And black people who were on the discussions were saying, we've suffered such racism in the establishment here, and we cannot put up with it, and we're not putting up with it. And their white colleagues were saying, absolutely, amen, amen to all that. We are not putting up with this, and we are not having a guns put in our face. We are not putting up with such rubbish, because there's some dignity to America, to the American Revolution, and to something which is called democracy, which is in such difficulty here in America. So if I could go to the point about intervention. People are sick of interventions around the world. They don't want it. Ordinary people don't want to be the enemies of the world. They're ashamed of what's happened. The veterans that came back in the town that I'm in, came back broken men. The children would throw stones at them because they were drugged out of their minds, and they didn't know how to rehabilitate themselves in civil society. They would throw stones at one of the vets, and he would fall on the ground sobbing because he thought it was a hand grenade. That is not pleasant to see, and that is a result of such intervention. So what I'm saying is that let's look at the evidence, but I don't see any appetite from the American people and even from the administration has had its head bashed. I'm not saying therefore capitalism is out of beyond its dream. It'll intervene as it has to, but the appetite's not there. What they would like to see is what at one time we talked about, Kautsky mentioned as ultra-imperialism. All the imperialist countries cooperating together and bringing down the developing nations who are in resistance to them in a cooperative manner, with no wars between the nation states. But all the nation states today are in battle with each other in the most extraordinary way. So they're not getting ultra-imperialism. Actually, they're getting something quite different. Now we are seeing just a point about the stuffy air in the trade union movement. John Ryman's not present with us, but I think he's dead right. The unions actually have been quite a disaster in America over the past period. They've not really fought for the workers or for the people. But we have to remember, and the same in South Africa, by the way, and it's a bit different in Britain, and maybe it's a bit different in each country, but let me just deal with this side of it. 90% of the workers in America are not organized. That is an appalling situation. How can you have a society which is moving progressively, to use a phrase, able to make reforms and to be able to continue and on to the next reform and to the next one without a reaction stepping in when you have 90% of the working people unorganized? It's impossible in capitalist world, and it certainly dampens the ability, to see a complete transformation. And yet it will be a transformation. I'll just come back to that point. And then this question about the type of organization, whether it's flat and so forth. Well, let's discuss the language. What we do see is, like in Black Lives Matter and in many other movements which are springing up for the youth, there's a hostility to any form of authoritarianism. In other words, central direction and planning, and in that sense. It has to have the feel of spontaneity. You cannot install a whole apparatus on top of a river in motion, a people in movement. Just then to conclude, if I could say, we're moving from a period of slow political change to rapid. At some time in the past, I mentioned to Roger, the economics is actually moving faster than the politics in America. And even in South Africa, we're still sitting with the ANC. It's hardly got if it went to election, maybe they'd even get more votes than before. In other words, politics at the formal level often doesn't seem to be changing very much, but it is changing now. If you went back, if you watch the elections in America, they go down to the precinct level, down to local government. And if you saw the figures, and John Ryman correctly has pointed this out, that you see the figures are there, that 1% change, 2% from Democrats to Republicans, elsewhere it's Republicans to the Democrats. It's tiny little changes from below. And we pointed this out, that's part of the component of on the brink. It's that we are on a certain balance, and yet things are changing, and they are changing in this sense, that once those 2% and 1% added up, it's not a huge change at the top, the final result. That's why Trump can jump up and down and say it's that he had the election stolen. But it is a decisive change. In other words, society has decided to move from reaction towards something non-reaction. Let's not put it at anything higher than that, but away from reaction. And we should take that on board in full measure. I've been reviewing books or reading books on the current period. Every one of them quotes Lenin. These are bourgeois professors and the like, but they all find that one quote from Lenin is particularly of use. And Lenin says there that in the current period, we're seeing an enormous acceleration in political life, that what might take decades or even eons to change is happening in a week or even in days. I don't have the exact quote. Roger will probably put it up there in chat. But that quote appears in every single book. In other words, the perspective of Marxism is now being reflected in society. And we are seeing that change is now becoming rapid change. Does that mean it's all in our favor? No. We've had an outburst of reaction, which is like a boil and an arm bursting, and there's pus all over the place. I hate to use the analogy, but the time has come when the cleaning up is beginning. There is a revulsion from youth, from white youth, from black youth, from people of good intentions, people appealing to their better nature. They don't want racism. They're sick of it actually now, because people are living next door. I mean, why do you want to fight your neighbor? What's the problem? And yet reaction wants a war, wants a civil war in America, and the people don't want a civil war to kill each other or to kill people of the rest of the world. That is the better nature of peoples, which we can see. And yet the entire direction of the past 4 years has been towards putting that poison into people, to building that boil, and to give us another boil and another boil until we cannot even see the way clear towards a healthy future. And yet we are going to break with that tradition. We are going to bring peoples into harmony. The working class is reorganizing. The movement maybe comes from within. As Aman says, it's within as well as out. Iran has the most amazing movements, if you think about it. And he's quite right, it should be recorded. That the working movements, working class is actually moving into action, occupying the factories in different places. That's what we want to see. And that's what's happening. It's not happening yet in America. We have to be specific. Certainly not happening in South Africa yet. We're seeing a movement which is just beginning. And yet we are the people that can see the movement beginning, and we can also see where it's going to end. And it's not ending anywhere near the pleasure of the bourgeois. It's actually ending in the direction in which we are intending to see society move. Let me stop there. I hope that I dealt with some of the points that have been raised as kind of critical points. And I look forward to people coming back and correcting us or supporting different views or saying it needs to be expressed in different ways. So that we get our perspectives nailed down and we face society and face the working class in confidence in our perspectives, ideas, and our methods. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, David. It's been a great discussion today and last week. I won't take up any more time, but just to remind you, our next session is next Sunday, not Saturday, back on Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT and the equivalent all around the world. It will be to discuss, really to move on from the political to some more practical issues of how to give WIN a bit more structure. And I won't take up time to explain our proposals now, but what you will get in the next few days is emails which will give you an indication of what we'll be talking about next week. Okay. Just a reminder that the recording of last week's discussion and of today's, well, the recording of last week's is up already on YouTube and on our website, and the same will be true of this one in a couple of days too. Do please all come next week, and thanks for your attendance. Bye-bye.